Hello, welcome to this Noble Science of Defence training video. I'm Chris, this is Sam who's here to help me today. And today we're going to look at the 4 quarters. In Silver's book, when he notes the order in which things should be trained, he mentions first they learn their quarters. What are the quarters? Fairly simply, cut your body into 4 pieces. There you have your 4 quarters. To set our quarters, divide a line straight down your centre, and then just halfway between your belly button and your sternum is a good place to cut for your upper and lower. However, this isn't mentioned, and you could take it at the waist, so your lower quarters are your legs, your upper quarter is your body. You could take it as your sternum, so your lower quarter starts on your body. It all depends on how you're going to be striking your opponent. For us, we put it around halfway between the sternum and the belly button. Thus, I have 4 quarters. I have upper and lower, and we have left and right. Obviously, you've seen the inside and outside video. We don't discuss left and right, so I have an inside quarter and an outside quarter. And this is one of the places where inside and outside will also be fairly relevant. So when I hold my guard in my right hand, my left side is my inside quarter, and my right side is my outside quarter. My guard, as you can see, sits slightly lower than the dividing line of my upper and lower quarters. So I've got some protection of my lower quarters. I don't need to try and protect my lower quarters in any way below my waist, because to defend below my waist, I simply step much quicker and easier. How do we use them? Well, first of all, these are good places for me to attack. So the quarters are places for me to attack. Inside quarters or outside quarters. If in class you're instructed to strike to the inside upper quarter, that is anywhere in this area. One thing you'll notice from Silver's work is he doesn't actually define any strikes. So there are a lot of arts will have strike 1, strike 2, strike 3, strike 4. We don't have that because Silver didn't describe that, but what we will have is strikes to the quarters. The wards and parries that we use, it doesn't matter how I strike. So essentially anything from a strike number 7 to a strike number 5 to a strike number 5 will be defended with an inside parry or with an outside guardant. So in this instance, I can strike anywhere from directly downwards, and then you can parry, all the way round to a horizontal cut, and the same parry will cover. This will work the same on the outside. It is only then when I start getting lower that you see the parries don't work as much. If I attack into the lower quarter, from the dividing line down to the waist, this parry will still stop it. If I strike lower than the waist, my opponent will keep their sword where it is and step. And you'll see what's happened here is I've put myself into a very bad position. Silver tells us that the only time anyone can cut your leg is if you are too far on the front leg, and then my opponent can cut it. And of course, he has very little sympathy for anyone who does that. He says, move it. But he also states if your opponent is standing too far on their front leg, then by Jove, cut it. The basic ways to use these quarters are that they are openings. When we take our guard, it is deliberately giving equal openings on the inside and the outside. My reaction time to both inside and outside is also equal. My opponent must make a choice to move inside or outside, and I'm not bothered which one they take due to the fact that my reaction time on both is equal. However, some systems will often ask you to turn slightly and hold a position to the outside. Don't get me wrong, this is done deliberately. However, they have closed the outside to attack and offered the inside to attack. The reason we don't use this is simply because They have offered the inside and they are aware that I'm likely to take the inside. However, their reaction time to the inside is still long. From this position, from an outside ward, if I come to this attack, they know that's the attack I'm going to take, but their time to get there is long, and this leaves them open for a feint. So outside ward. Whilst they know I'm taking the inside line, I know their time is long. So again, from an outside ward, I move to the inside. As my opponent starts moving across, I can change around their weapon because I know the path that it's taking. Whilst they are taking an element of control, they are also giving me an element of control. If my opponent has their weapon on their center line, first of all, I now have to choose inside or outside. It's exactly the same opening for me. If I choose inside, my opponent will be there very quickly. And for me to think of trying to feint that, it doesn't take much for them to come back because they've only made a short movement, parry the inside, quickly ward to the outside. But there's another way that we use these quarters, and that is to prevent my opponent from getting true space. True space is the point at which my parry or my ward has the correct musculoskeletal position and strength to resist the incoming attack. In both scenarios, whether they're in an outside ward or a central guard, my opponent has the ability to move to a position of strength to defend an inside strike. If my opponent is in an outside ward and I move to strike the inside, they can correctly get to a strong inside guard. If I do the same, my opponent's on a central ward, central guard, and I attack to the inside, even quicker, but they can still get to the point where they can get the strong inside ward or guard or parry. So instead what I do is, if I engage on the inside, then I cut to the outside quarter. If I engage on the inside and attack on the inside, my opponent has the ability to maintain true space as I make the strike. Whereas if I engage on the inside and strike to the outside quarter, my opponent doesn't get the true space and they can't hold a strong ward against my attack. This works equally well on the outside. So I engage on the outside and strike instead to the inside. I get the strength to prevent them making true space. Knowing how to use my opponent's quarters is one thing. Knowing how to use my own is also very, very useful. For example, the outside ward that we looked at in the beginning, my opponent takes an outside ward. They know that they have entirely opened their inside quarter, and thus I will be encouraged to go and take the inside quarter. From a central guard, we can do the same. My opponent takes a central guard and shifts slightly one way or the other. From my point of view, as we've seen in the inside and outside video, this creates a new opening for me. Therefore, my opponent can start controlling me by offering me these openings, but knowing that they are doing so. So my opponent is in a central guard. I am stood directly in front, also in a central guard. My opponent makes a slight shift one way or the other. So here they've decided to shift slightly to my inside and thus have offered this opening on their outside. My opponent is no fool and is aware that they've done this. I, unfortunately, in this instance, am the fool, and I am going to take this opportunity. Jolly good, an opening, I will take it, but my opponent, knowing that that's where I'm going to strike because they've offered it, simply takes a step to the other side and parries. So my opponent makes an opening. I'm going to be a fool and I'm going to take the opening, but my opponent knew it was there, and therefore, as soon as I act, can defend against that. So I need to be very careful of what my opponent is offering. I need to be aware of my quarters as well as my opponent's quarters. And then we run into the wards video, in which I use my ward to close my line. So my opponent offers that opening, and as I make the action, I don't just run down like this. I make my ward to close my outside quarter so that my opponent can make their parry, but are not necessarily able to make a counter strike from there. So I close my quarter by making my ward. We can then get into more complicated tactics, which we'll go into another video, where I know my opponent has offered me an opening. I take the opening to trick my opponent into the action that I want them to take. But I think we'll worry about that in another video. My quarters: upper, lower, inside and outside. My guard in our system offers equal opportunity to both and equal response to both, but I can use them as opening. However, if I engage on the inside, I always cut across my opponent and across their blade to prevent them the opportunity to get true space and make a ward to defend themselves. Hopefully that gives you an idea of the quarters and a very, very small idea of how to use them. This becomes much more complicated later on in your training. For now, it's just an idea of what the quarters are, where they are, and a basic idea of how to use them. Thank you very much, and we'll see you in class.